Yakov Dzhugashvili, The Mystery of Stalin's Son in Nazi Captivity. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're into historical mysteries, epic tales of courage, and stories that make you think, you're in the right place. Today, we're diving into the incredible and tragic story of Yakov Dzhugashvili, the eldest son of Joseph Stalin, the Soviet leader who shaped the 20th century. Yakov's fate during World War II, when he was captured by the Nazis, is still surrounded by wild rumors and speculation. Some say he betrayed his country and worked with the Nazis. Others claim he escaped to the United States, changed his name, and even worked for the CIA. There are even tales that he secretly returned to the Soviet Union under a different identity. These stories, sometimes backed by well-known historians, create an air of mystery around Yakov. But what's the real story? Let's cut through the myths, look at the facts, and explore what this story means for us today. Being Stalin's son wasn't just a privilege, it was a heavy burden. Yakov's life, especially his time as a prisoner of war, became a pawn in the Nazi propaganda machine. Yet Yakov proved to be a man of unbreakable spirit. His story is one of courage, defiance, and tragedy, and it deserves to be told. So, grab a coffee, get comfortable, and let's uncover the truth about Yakov Dzhugashvili. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments at the end. It's the summer of 1941, and the world is on fire. On June 22nd, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, a massive invasion of the Soviet Union. The German army, with its blitzkrieg tactics, was tearing through Soviet territory, capturing cities like Brest, Minsk, and Vitebsk in a matter of weeks. The Red Army was caught off guard, and the Soviet Union was in chaos. In the middle of this turmoil was Yakov Dzhugashvili, a 34-year-old artillery battery commander. On July 13, 1941, Yakov showed what he was made of. Stationed near the small town of Lyazno in Belarus, think of it as a quiet village with about 7,000 people today, Yakov and his unit took on the enemy. In a fierce battle, they destroyed a German battery, wiped out nearly a company of enemy soldiers, and took out 2 anti-tank guns. This was no small feat, and Yakov was recommended for the Order of the Red Banner, a prestigious Soviet military award. But as we'll see, that award never came. Why? The answer lies in what happened just 3 days later. On July 16, 1941, while trying to break out of an encirclement near Lyazno, Yakov was captured by German forces. This was a bombshell. The son of Joseph Stalin, the man leading the Soviet Union, was now a prisoner of the Nazis. For the Soviet leadership, this was a personal and political disaster. To understand why, let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture of what was happening in the Soviet Union at the time. To really get Yakov's story, we need to understand the context of 1941. The Soviet Union had spent the 1930s transforming itself from a largely rural country into an industrial powerhouse. Under Stalin's leadership, the USSR built thousands of factories, power plants, and railroads. By 1940, the country was producing about 10% of the world's industrial output, a huge leap for a nation that was mostly agricultural just a decade earlier. For example, in 1940, the Soviet Union churned out 2.6 million tons of steel, 183,000 vehicles, and 18,000 tanks. This gave the Red Army a solid foundation, but it was still no match for Nazi Germany, which had conquered most of Europe and had access to the resources of occupied territories like France and Poland. When the Germans invaded, the Soviet Union was caught unprepared. By the end of 1941, the USSR had lost about 3 million soldiers, killed, wounded, or captured. The economic toll was devastating. The occupied territories, including Ukraine and Belarus, accounted for up to 40% of the country's industrial output and 60% of its agricultural production. Every soldier, every commander was critical to the war effort. Yakov's capture wasn't just a personal tragedy for Stalin. It was a propaganda gift for the Nazis. In Soviet ideology, being taken prisoner was seen as shameful. In August 1941, Stalin issued Order Number 270, which branded those who surrendered as traitors. For Stalin, whose image as an infallible leader was central to Soviet propaganda, having his own son in enemy hands was a nightmare. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, one of Stalin's top generals, later wrote in his memoirs that Stalin was deeply worried about Yakov but couldn't show weakness. He knew that if the Nazis realized who they had, Yakov's chances of survival would be slim. So, on July 16, 1941, Yakov was taken prisoner. When he boldly declared that he was Stalin's son, the Germans didn't believe him at first. They thought he might be lying to get better treatment. They interrogated him repeatedly, trying to confirm his identity. But Yakov stood his ground, proudly stating that he was Yakov Dzhugashvili, son of the Soviet leader, and that the Nazis would never break him. At first, Yakov was sent to a prisoner of war camp in East Prussia, near the town of Prostken, now Praski, Poland. Compared to other prisoners, he was treated relatively well. He wasn't forced to do backbreaking labor or subjected to the brutal conditions many Soviet POWs faced. The Nazis saw Yakov as a valuable asset, a potential tool for propaganda. They held regular talks with him, trying to convince him to cooperate. But Yakov refused over and over again. Here's where things get dirty. During one of these talks, the Germans secretly recorded Yakov's conversation. They then edited the recording to make it sound like he was praising the German army and urging Soviet soldiers to surrender. This doctored recording was used in a massive Nazi propaganda campaign. Leaflets with Yakov's supposed words were dropped over Soviet lines, and radio broadcasts claimed that Stalin's own son had defected. It was a devastating blow to Soviet morale and to Stalin personally. When Yakov learned about the manipulated recording, he was furious. He realized the Nazis had twisted his words, and from that moment, he refused to speak to them at all. This act of defiance was incredible, but it came at a cost. The Germans, frustrated by his resistance, decided to make his life much harder. After failing to get Yakov to cooperate, the Nazis transferred him to a Gestapo prison. Here, the gloves came off. The Gestapo wasn't known for its kindness, and even Stalin's son wasn't spared. Yakov faced intense psychological pressure and, at times, physical abuse. Yet, he remained defiant, refusing to give the Nazis anything they could use against the Soviet Union. In April 1942, Yakov was moved to the Hammelburg concentration camp. Conditions there were brutal. He was starved, overworked, and subjected to constant harassment by the guards. The Nazis seemed determined to break him, perhaps hoping that fear and suffering would force him to cooperate. But Yakov held firm. One German officer later recalled that Yakov carried himself with dignity, even in the face of unimaginable hardship. By February 1943, after nearly 2 years of trying to sway him, the Nazis gave up. On the orders of Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, Yakov was sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. There, he was treated like any other prisoner. No special treatment, no more talks. The Nazis had one last card to play. They offered to exchange Yakov for Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, who had been captured by the Soviets after the Battle of Stalingrad. Stalin's response was cold and now famous. "I don't trade soldiers for field marshals." Behind those words was a father's pain, but Stalin couldn't afford to show it. On April 14, 1943, Yakov Dzhugashvili died in Sachsenhausen. The details of his death are still debated. The official report says he was shot by a guard after throwing himself onto the camp's electrified fence, possibly in an attempt to escape or as a final act of defiance. Some believe he provoked the guard into shooting him, choosing death over further suffering. Others have spun wild theories, claiming his death was staged and that Yakov was secretly whisked away to live under a new identity. These ideas, while intriguing, lack any solid evidence. What we do know is that Yakov died as a prisoner who never betrayed his country or his honor. His death was a tragic end to a life caught in the crosshairs of history. Yakov's story makes you think. First, imagine the pressure of being the son of a man like Stalin, someone worshipped by millions and feared by just as many. Yakov didn't choose his father, but his life was defined by that connection. He could have stayed out of the war, using his status to avoid danger, but he chose to fight. He could have cooperated with the Nazis to save himself, but he chose honor over survival. Second, this story shows how propaganda can twist the truth. The Nazis tried to paint Yakov as a traitor, but he was the opposite. It's a reminder to question what you hear and dig for the facts, especially in today's world of misinformation. Finally, Yakov's story is about resilience. In the face of unimaginable hardship, he stayed true to himself. That makes him not just Stalin's son, but a symbol of courage and integrity. The Nazis' use of Yakov was part of a broader propaganda war. Germany spent millions of Reichsmarks on leaflets, radio broadcasts, and films designed to break Soviet morale. Capturing Stalin's son was a golden opportunity, but Yakov's refusal to cooperate turned it into a failure. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, used its own propaganda to rally the people. Stories of heroes like Zoya Kosmodemyanskaya and Alexander Matrosov inspired millions to keep fighting. Yakov, in his own way, became part of that fight by refusing to give in. What can we take away from Yakov's story? First, don't judge someone based on rumors. Yakov was slandered, but his actions spoke louder than the lies. Second, courage and honor define who we are, even in the darkest times. And finally, history reminds us to cherish peace and honor those who paid the ultimate price for it. Guys, Yakov Dzhugashvili's story isn't just a chapter from the past. It's a lesson in courage and resilience. If the story moved you, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more incredible tales from history. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Do you believe the rumors about Yakov working with the Nazis? Or do you think he stayed true to his principles until the end? Let's get the conversation going. And please, share this story with your friends. Let's spread the word about this amazing piece of history.